Hello, everyone. It's April 7th, 2025, and welcome to this week's edition of the Dissenter Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Gostola, the editor of the Dissenter newsletter, and I have a full slate of headlines for you this week, as well as a main story. If you're new to the show, thank you for being a subscriber and supporter of the newsletter. Those listening on Monday get exclusive early access to the show. Those of you who are hearing the show on Wednesday, April 9th, and after, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning into the show. And I encourage you to become subscribers by being a subscriber of the Dissenter Weekly podcast. You make independent journalism on whistleblowers, press freedom, and government secrecy possible. So go to the dissenter.org. That's the dissenter.org. And you can subscribe at the website there. You also can just chip in a few dollars at the dissenter.org/donate. That's a good way to support the show if you're not able to make a regular commitment and subscribe. With that, let's get to the headlines. The first story is that a media outlet in Mississippi won a victory against an anti-press lawsuit. Mississippi Today, a nonprofit news organization in the state of Mississippi, notched a victory against an anti-press lawsuit filed by the state's former governor, Phil Bryant. On April 4th, a Mississippi Circuit Court judge dismissed Bryant's defamation lawsuit, quote, with prejudice, end quote. The lawsuit was in retaliation for the outlet's reporting on Bryant's role in a major public fund fraud scandal. A lower court had ordered Mississippi Today to give the former governor access to notes and interviews with confidential sources, which posed a clear threat to, quote, the constitutional rights and privacy of journalists and every Mississippi citizen, end quote. Next story is that public records teams were disbanded at Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and HHS officials cut public records teams at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Food and Drug Administration, and the National Institutes of Health, as well as other agencies on Tuesday. That was reported by NPR. The cuts were revealed by, quote, multiple current and former staffers who did not want to be named because of fears of retribution, end quote. That leaves only a few staffers to fulfill Freedom of Information Act requests at these HHS agencies. We can expect backlogs and delayed releases of records to increase substantially as a result of this disbanding. The next story is that CDC was sued for destroying its FOIA office. Related to the previous story, a watchdog group known as Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, filed a lawsuit that alleged it was unlawful under the Freedom of Information Act and the Administrative Procedures Act to close down the CDC's FOIA office. The group said they had, quote, requested records through FOIA on an expedited basis and received an automatic response stating that the FOIA office had been placed on admin leave and is unable to respond to any emails. CREW's requests seek information related to the shuttering of the office and DOJ's involvement. DOJ is allegedly involved, as well as records regarding a recent report that the CDC allegedly suppressed an expert assessment about measles vaccination. We covered that last week, the suppression of a report on the spread of measles in the United States. Next story is that a watchdog group has warned EPA employees not to use the free Wi-Fi. A memo obtained by Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or PEER, shows that U.S. Environmental Protection Agency employees were offered free internet access for their personal mobile phones, laptops, and other devices. Sounds great, except the service would apparently be provided by Elon Musk's Starlink, and Peer warns that this would enable the EPA to, quote, monitor employees' personal internet based usage and potentially their communications. Prior to this offer, the EPA has had no Wi Fi for employees to connect to their personal devices. Employees would have to use data if they wanted internet access during their hours in the office. EPA employees should not take advantage of this free service, remarked Peer Science Policy Director Kyla Bennett, a scientist and attorney formerly with the EPA. Through this connection, the EPA will be able to compile data and information on their employees' personal internet usage, Bennett added. It would make it fairly easy for an agency to track internet usage and label certain employees as potential media sources or whistleblowers if they were consuming any content deemed to be anti-Trump or anti-Musk. That's my comment. The comment that by adding this internet service in the mix and encouraging employees to log on, you're basically sort of entrapping them in a manner that you can follow their activity and see if you might be able to root out people who are most likely to expose what the EPA is really doing during President Donald Trump's administration. Let's get to the next headline. The documents reveal ICE's solitary confinement policy under Biden. The American Civil Liberties Union obtained documents as a result of a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit that shine a light on the solitary confinement policy used by ICE against migrant detainees while Joe Biden was president. The policy was updated in 2024, but the Biden administration refused to release it. The updated policy indicates that a review of medical and mental health care needs is supposed to be completed for each detainee placed in solitary. Those with physical illnesses or mental illnesses are to be given treatment outside the facility. Justification for solitary should be, quote, documented and entered into an ICE database, end quote. However, ICE's use of solitary has long been abusive, if not torturous. And we can expect or surmise that this type of treatment of detainees is continuing or has increased with the Trump administration. The next story is Biden DOJ let Texas Attorney General off the hook. And this involves Ken Paxton, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who was accused of corruption by multiple whistleblowers. The Associated Press reported that the U.S. Justice Department decided during the final weeks of Joe Biden's presidency to not prosecute Paxton. Paxton was accused of abusing his office to aid a political donor. Meanwhile, a civil district judge in Texas ruled in favor of 4 former senior aides who were fired after they reported Paxton to the FBI in violation of the state's whistleblower statute. The judge awarded $6.6 million to the whistleblowers, and Paxton immediately said he would, quote, appeal this bogus ruling, end quote. And finally, for the headlines, U.S. judge calls Trump officials invoking of the state secrets privilege pretty sketchy. Judge James Boasberg, who is presiding over a case challenging the transfer of Venezuelan migrants to El Salvador and Honduras, held a hearing this past week where he considered whether to hold officials in Donald Trump's administration in contempt because it is believed that they defied a court order to turn around the flights and return well over 200 Venezuelan migrants to the United States. During the hearing, he commented on the fact that Trump officials had invoked the quote unquote state secrets privilege, as it's known, and he called their invoking pretty sketchy, especially because the government won't share any information under seal. We spoke a little bit about this in the previous episode, but typically, when the government invokes the state secrets privilege, some of the information is shown to the judge in an effort to persuade them that they deserve to be secretive, that there is some legitimacy to withholding information and not allowing a lawsuit to go forward. All right, so let's get to the main story for this week's show. It's on Boeing whistleblowers and the culture of retaliation at this military defense contractor or aerospace corporation. It's received a lot of attention over the past years for this culture that involves going after whistleblowers viciously. The corruption within Boeing, we even see a trial is upcoming against Boeing for the way in which it has mismanaged and put people's lives at risk. There have been deadly accidents in which hundreds of people have died. And in just the last year, we saw two whistleblowers die, one under suspicious circumstances, the other was as a result of an infection that turned into a fatal illness for this whistleblower. That was Joshua Dean died from an illness. But then John Barnett received quite a bit of attention because he was in the middle of a deposition providing testimony towards a whistleblower retaliation lawsuit, which he had come forward to pursue. And then he died, and it was ruled suicide. And so this contributed to a lot of focus on Boeing last year. Boeing changed CEOs. They went from CEO David Calhoun to CEO Kelly Ortberg, who came over from another corporation, which we'll get to, actually has a connection to Boeing, although he likes to boast that there's a bit of like outsider independence that's being brought to the position because this individual who's running the company now was not promoted from within to take over Boeing. But that being said, there was a hearing on Capitol Hill this past week under a kind of nauseating headline of Safety First, restoring Boeing's status as a great American manufacturer. Hoorah. But he was there, the new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, to testify, answer questions. And it was actually a Republican senator, Marsha Blackburn, who brought up the issue of whistleblowers and retaliation on the part of Boeing. So let's watch this clip.
We just did an all-employee survey, which is a means that I'm going to use to measure the culture change. And we have that survey structured so I can look at any place in the organization.
Okay, then let me do this. I want to ask you about whistleblowers.
Okay.
Because we've heard from some of the Boeing whistleblowers, and I know you're familiar with their names, but you don't have a good record of protecting and supporting whistleblowers. And some of the stories around these whistleblowers has been very upsetting to people like me who have worked through my public service to protect whistleblowers. I think that they're essential. So talk to me about what you're doing to change that policy to support and not to ostracize or isolate whistleblowers.
Senator, the company has an anti-retaliation policy. It's unacceptable for anybody to retaliate against, whether it's a whistleblower or anybody bringing up a quality issue. And I've made that perfectly clear in all of our all-employee meetings, all-employee sessions. In fact, I've told employees if they have an issue, send me a note. I'll address it. And some have sent me a note. I've met with the whistleblower, one of the whistleblowers. My door is open to discuss with any of the whistleblowers what they're seeing and make sure that there is no retaliation in the organization. But this is a part of the culture change within the company is we need.
Oh, not to interrupt, but I want to ask you, are you stepping back to some of those whistleblowers who have experienced a less than positive relationship? Are you righting those wrongs?
Senator, in many cases, the whistleblowers that I'm aware of, those activities happened a long time ago. Some of
that.
those are still with the company, and I've met with one of the
Okay.
whistleblowers with the company. So I know that in the past, all the retaliation claims have been thoroughly investigated, and if there's retaliation, there's been corrective action taken.
Okay.
That was Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg, who took over for the previous CEO, who I'm about to show you a clip of his testimony, because the talking points from the leadership of Boeing, they haven't changed. This idea that there's a anti-retaliation policy, so Boeing does do right by whistleblowers, has absolutely zero basis, given the fact that there have been dozens of whistleblowers that have come forward. There's no specific engagement with any of the allegations that have been put out there into the press or shared with senators, representatives in Congress. And it's really hard to take Ortberg seriously. Also, this idea that this happened a long time ago, these people came forward and they're all blowing the whistle, or they spoke to issues with Boeing from decade ago or longer, whatever he thinks a long time ago might be. It's not true, because there were people who were on Capitol Hill testifying. One of the whistleblowers that spoke on Capitol Hill, Sam Salapur, his allegations come from the last few years, like 2021, 2022. It's not something from many years ago, as Ortberg makes it seem. And you can just listen right now to David Calhoun, who was on Capitol Hill, questioned by Senator Richard Blumenthal about whistleblower retaliation at Boeing.
Boeing has a code of conduct that states, and I quote, "I will never retaliate against or punish anyone who speaks up to report a concern," end quote. And yet the whistleblowers that we have heard, including testifying before this committee, have reported a host of retaliatory behaviors, from reassignment to exclusion from key meeting to being sidelined and sidetracked in their careers, verbal harassment and threats, and even physical violence. After whistleblower John Barnett raised his concerns about missing parts, he reported that his supervisor called him 19 times in one day and 21 times another day. And when Barnett asked his supervisor about those calls, he was told, quote, "I'm going to push you until you break." He broke. When whistleblower Sam Mohawk raised concerns about Boeing's concealment of non-conforming parts, he was put in charge of completing corrective action investigations with an impossible deadline, and then threatened with formal discipline, including firing. He couldn't meet that deadline. When I hear about these experiences, I wonder whether Boeing really wants change. How can you reassure us that Boeing is going to, in fact, end this broken safety culture?
Senator, I'm going to start by assuring you that I listened to the whistleblowers that appeared at your hearing. Something went wrong. And I know the sincerity of their remarks.
Well, let me ask you a more
And then,
specific.
with respect to our company, we do have a policy. I often cite and reward the people who bring issues forward, even if they have huge consequence on our company and our production levels, et cetera. My leadership team does that. We survey our people with respect to, do they feel empowered to speak up? That survey performance gets better and better. It's never perfect. We work hard to reach out to our people. Immediately following Alaska, we had a stand down. The stand downs continue and they rotate, and we listen to everybody. I'm trying to deal with 30,000 ideas on how we can move forward. How do we make their jobs easier? How do we train them more effectively? How do we do that? Our team
Let me
we are
ask you,
working hard to
Mr.
listen.
Calhoun, let me ask you, how many of your employees have been fired for retaliating against whistleblowers?
Senator, I don't have that number on the tip of my tongue, but I know it.
Have
I know it
any-
happens.
have
I
any
know
been
it happens.
fired?
I am happy to follow up and get you that number.
I would appreciate
Yes.
your following up. Let me ask you, have any of your supervisors, your managers, anybody been fired for retaliating against people who speak truth to power about defects or problems in production?
Senator, we have fired people and disciplined people, and I am happy to follow up with what
Who
you
have
need.
you fired and how have they been disciplined?
I can't, I have concern on privacy, and as you know, every one of those cases.
But will you come back to this committee and
I
tell
will
us?
most certainly get back to you, sir.
So that was the former Boeing CEO. And last year, he was embattled and going around participating in proceedings like that one, trying to defend the corporation. Eventually was replaced. Kelly Ortberg, it should be stated, according to the Foundation for Aviation Safety, is an individual who had served as the CEO of Collins Aerospace Company from December 2018 to February 2020. But prior to that, and this group, by the way, is one composed of and led by former whistleblower Ed Pearson. And he's been on Democracy Now! He's been out there as an advocate. He also testified on Capitol Hill alongside Sam Salahpour. And this individual, Kelly Ortberg, who now runs Boeing, he was the CEO and chair of Rockwell Collins. And Rockwell Collins built the two angle of attack sensors and the software known as MCAS that failed during both 737 MAX crashes and played a role in deactivating this alert that was on both airplanes. And Ortberg is someone who would have some knowledge of Rockwell Collins' role as a Boeing supplier that was involved in both disasters. It's not much of a departure to put Ortberg in charge of Boeing because he is implicated in the scandals that have rocked this multinational corporation that is plays such a large role in enabling air travel for millions of people. Now, this is a clip up here I'd like to play before I wrap of Sam Salahpour. Sam is just giving everyone a flavor of this viciousness, this harassment that can be experienced if you come forward. So contrary to what the leadership, the management of Boeing might say to the world, this is how you get treated if you are a Boeing whistleblower.
Mr. Salahpour, I showed you earlier a photograph of a tire wheel from your car. That bolt was inserted by someone as a threat. perhaps as a risk to you.
Yes, I was losing just air on my tire, and I bring it somewhere, and they say, "Hey, you have a nail in the tire." That's about 1 month old tire. So I brought it back to the shop that they fixed it, and they fixed it. I went to pick it up, and the gentleman told me that, this nail was not picked up through normal driving. I didn't know anything about that. He's the one who brought it to my attention. And I came home and I had to go all the way back there to get the tire, to just save the tire. It was like 25-mile drive. But anyway, but the bottom line is that, yes, the nail was inserted in there. I believe it happened at work. I have no proof of that.
You mentioned also a threat to your physical safety, someone saying they would
Yes,
have killed you if they
someone
heard.
told me they would have killed someone like me if you said something, what you said. So
In conclusion, I'll end on this note that there's a protest music singer, a folk musician who's enjoyed some viral success, and his name is Jesse Wells. And Jesse has long flowing hair and has a good sense of humor in the way that he sings about a lot of political matters when he weaves that into his songwriting. And he has a song about Boeing. It's called Whistleblower. It's particularly about the case of John Barnett, and the refrain that he goes through, it goes like this: you can know a lot, you can know a little, but whatever you do, don't blow the whistle. And just the kind of toe tapping beat that he has beneath it, this kind of a percussion, which he's basically doing with his guitar, is pretty infectious. I mean, if it doesn't worm its way into your ear when you hear it, so go, if you find the song. For reasons related to copyright, I won't try to fit it into here, but you can go look up Whistleblower by Jesse Wells. And I've also featured it as part of a side project that I do on protest music. You can find over at protestmusic.substack.com. I found a way to bring that into the Dissenter Weekly. All right, so that's the show for this week. Thank you for tuning in to the Dissenter Weekly. I will be back next week with another show.